Hello, my name is Deborah Fullerton, and I'd like to welcome you to the Art Museum of South Texas and to a temporary traveling exhibition across the Atlantic, American Impressionism Through the French Lens. And this is from the Reading Public Museum in Reading, Pennsylvania. And this exhibition is an excellent example of what occurred in Europe in the late 19th century that changed the world of art forever. It was really the very beginning of modernism. And that is because before this time frame, the Academy basically governed what the subject matter and the approach to making art would be in terms of how it was made and who was received and shown in these salon exhibitions. But once the Impressionism movement started, it could not be stopped. So it was really kind of an earth-shattering, world-shattering, art-shattering moment for artists. So they banded together and they created their own salons. So what I'd like to do is to take you through our exhibition on loan from the Reading Public Museum and show you how we've laid it out. So in the opening area, we want to show you that there are many different genres within the Impressionism movement. And Impressionism was very interested in showing the conditions of the world around us, both outside and working in plein air, and also in intimate settings like you see in this interior space. What did it mean to be modern in this late 19th century time frame in Europe? We were really looking at the accomplishments and the advancements of the modern age. When you think about the Industrial Revolution, think about what that brought to the world at that time. Travel became much more prevalent. We were able to get on railroads and go from one location to another within the course of a single day. Think about that impact. If you have been in a more rural area or even in a more urban area, and you were held in that space and that place due to your ability to travel, this really opened up the world to artists and to creatives, to poets, all across Europe, and it was very meaningful at that time. So in this opening gallery, we see portraiture, we see the qualities of relaxation and leisure. We see in the Benson painting moving through that waterscape with high key color, broad brushstrokes, and look at all the white that is included on that reflection of water. This is a key element in looking at and really appreciating the qualities of Impressionism, because this was a way that the world could be viewed anew in terms of its interpretation by the artists. So they are working very swiftly, they're working much more mobily. They no longer had to take their pigments that they ground themselves, but they could take these tubes of paint and their palettes that we'll see in the next gallery out into the landscape and really capture the moving and changing energy and light in those spaces. So colors are very bright, they're quite illuminated, and the use of white in these pictures creates a really atmospheric shift and an understanding of the qualities of light in these pictures. John Singer Sargent was a much sought after portraitist, and this is his manservant that he's captured in this very intimate scene. I love the way the edge of the book is simply a swift matter of brushstrokes that become something alluded to, the edge of a book, the pages in the book, and yet it is nothing more than a brushstroke. The energy of that movement of the artist is really a precursor to what we start to see in American Impressionism in the earliest 20th century. Let's take a look. Okay, so now we're in a second gallery to that opening statement where we looked at urban landscape, outdoor landscape, leisure life, and the marketplace, right? Now we're going to look back at what was happening in Europe and in the Barbizon School, where we looked at tonalism and the use and the qualities of light. It wasn't exactly hand in hand with Impressionism, but it was occurring at the same time and about 30 miles outside of Paris. So the influence and the cooperation between the artists in the Barbizon School and the Impressionists, such as Edgar Degas, Renoir, Mary Cassatt, who was an American now living in Europe, really captured the imagination of what it meant to look at the world for subjects that were real and everyday and more common. So the only still life in this entire exhibition is by William Merritt Chase. And I mention him because he, along with 6 other artists depicted in this particular selection, banded together in New York City and started the 10. And they were American artists that had traveled to Europe and really embraced what was happening with these Impressionists in Europe. And they brought that energy back to the US and really started showing as a collective over a 20-year period. Every year they had an exhibition that showed their evolution as artists. William Merritt Chase started a school in New York City and was really training men and women out in plein air in the midst of changing life. When we look at these portraits over here, we really see the rapid brushstroke, the energy of the artist moving across that picture plane. And look at the qualities of brushstroke that really capture and embolden the quality of light in that picture, the suggestion of transparency, the fullness of the texture and the energy of what that light is doing in that landscape. And then the intimacy of Mary Cassatt, showing that relationship between the mother and the child. We really start to look at the everyday, and no longer were we looking at what was commissioned by many families at the time, but what the artists chose to emphasize and to bring out in their works of art. So we see portraiture in this gallery, we see genre scenes, people at rest in the middle of their workday, people in the field, and also at rest in an intimate scene. So Degas was one who was really interested in those quiet moments, those moments of respite when women might be taking care and being more reflective in their private moments. So the next 2 spaces, including this casework here, show the palette of William Merritt Chase and his brush. So these are vintage pieces from the history of American art. And as we said earlier, William Merritt Chase was a teacher. He very much embraced the qualities of capturing the world in a realistic way, as you saw in that beautiful still life, very much in the school of the Dutch masters, right? Lots of darkness, lots of highlight, volumetric form. These were all really important aspects of his development as an artist. But once he started to move into the more impressionistic expression, he really took that light and that texture and that energy to a new level. So we have a photographic example of his studio space, which was very much a place where his students came to learn from him, but they also went out into the field with him and really saw the effects of changing light in an atmospheric place. It might be next to the water, glistening on the water, moving through the trees, that kind of dappled light that really illuminated fabric and illuminated the sitter, the portrait, the person. So William Merritt Chase was one of the 10 and one of the instigators of bringing that energy of the Impressionistic movement to the US. So when we start to look at some of the heavies in French Impressionism, Daubigny was definitely one of them. And when you look at the qualities of his landscapes, he was said to have been the finest painter of water. And Claude Monet said that about him. So what high praise to come from such an impactful artist. And when you look at his landscapes, there's an energy to their subtleties, to their shifts and their tones, from the naturalistic color to that kind of breaking light. So there's this illuminating effect that Doheny really brought to his paintings. So we tried to cluster some of these forest scenes that were literally outdoor spaces and places where an artist would go and be covered by the canopy of the tree, but in many cases you would see this kind of interior light falling through the tree. So there's really sort of this beautiful kind of drama in the early part of French Impressionism. So this gallery is really a mix of the French Impressionists and the American Impressionists, and where they took that movement in the US, which happened in the early 20th century. And that's really important because once we got back to the States, this energy and this interpretation of these light spaces and places really placed the American scene in the fore of what was about to happen in the middle of the 20th century. And what do you think that was? That was a very expressionistic time. And so once this moment opened the doors to the way a work of art is made, then we were just a few steps away from these American artists taking hold of that and really bringing us into the 20th century in art history. So finally, we are at the edge and at the ending of this American Impressionism exhibition. And what we are looking at in this area is waterscape and the lives of American and French people on the edge of the water. This is an excellent example of what was happening after that Impressionism movement was in its fore. This is by Robert Spencer, and you see the individual brushwork. Every stroke is evident, right? And yet it composes and it becomes something whole. There's a blending of color, there's dramatic color, there's atmospheric conditions, and kind of the vegetation has this kind of kinetic energy. This is very characteristic of what we see not only in landscape, but also in waterscape as well. Broad brush strokes, high key color, light falling directly down and on, and quite evident in the light and shadow on the scenes there. In this space, we see a beautiful example of a tonalist painting done at night with snow on the banks at the edge of a river. And this is one of the founders of the 10 Impressionists in New York City. In these pictures, we're looking at industry, we're looking at progress, we're looking at the development of transportation through the waterways. So this is another aspect to what was going on in the world around the development of Impressionism. And when we look at all of this coming together, there's an invigoration of light and shadow, of energy and texture. And this is really at the forefront and pushing us into what would soon become abstract expressionism, starting in the late 1940s. So one final aspect, a real benefit of this exhibition is to take a stroll through all of the galleries in each of these paintings and drawings and see the world depicted in a certain period of time. And when you look at what you're seeing and how you're seeing it, it might be a seasonal shift. There are depictions of spring, right? And the budding of trees. There's the depiction of snow, the sandy shores and the frothy foam of the sea. So there's so much context and content in how a work of art is made. And that was a major shift in what was happening with Impressionism. Was the subject was as much about how it was made and why it was made in terms of the advancements that had happened in this time frame in the Industrial Revolution. So these are very heady times that we have in this exhibition, and we are thrilled to be able to share this collection with you. Thank you for being with us.